As a lead experience architect, I work in the field of user experience. I'm going to be talking a little bit about what user experience is, because I think there are some misconceptions about that. I'm also going to be talking about what it's like to work with a user experience agency. So it's also exciting to share with people who are interested in it. Welcome. My name is Ari Weissman. You can call me Ari. My talk is going to be about UX and about what it's like to work with a UX agency. I'd like to thank you all for coming. It really means a lot. So a couple of things we're going to talk about. I'm going to cover just a bit of an intro. I'm going to talk a bit about what UX is. You probably all heard of it. Some of you may know more than others, but there are some misconceptions, I think, which I can hopefully clarify/clear up for you. What is a UX agency? What is a UX agency structured? What is the design process a UX agency uses? And really, what's the point? Right? Why would you use a UX agency over a different agency? What are the outcomes that you get from working with the UX design process that you get from working with a UX design agency? And then I'm going to talk a little more about some of the tangible, like all this stuff at the beginning is a bit kind of big theory, and I'm going to talk a little more about some of the more tactical stuff that you can apply more easily and readily. So that's the principles and practice, and a little about measuring and improving. Sound good?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So like I said, my name's Ari Weissman. I've been in this field for quite a long time. I've worked on the East Coast. I've worked out here. I've worked in Australia for a while. I am responsible at Effective UI for all things UX as a lead experience architect. That includes working with clients and structuring client engagements. It includes developing strategy. It includes actual design. And it includes working with developers. And it includes measurement at the end. So really end-to-end in the process. My background is a degree in engineering and psychology from Tufts University. It was a human factors degree. And a lot of people say, oh, that doesn't really make sense. But it really is, I think, at the core of UX. When you think about how people behave, what are their behaviors, needs, and goals, right? That's the essence of cognitive psychology. How do you use information and what do you do with it? And then engineering is how do you build stuff out of that? So I started initially working on more non-digital products. Like I worked for a company that made school curriculum, and I've slowly moved more in towards digital. But I would say my passions are probably across the entire design spectrum as opposed to just in digital. And I'm going to talk a bit about how UX really isn't just about digital. So currently here at Effective UI, I'm working currently on a couple of big projects, one with Time Warner, one with Amex, and one with a company called Freeman Co., who is actually huge, but most of you have probably never heard of, who do logistics. And I can talk about them more if you have questions. But a little bit about Effective UI, because they're paying me to say this. So Effective UI, I've been working at Effective UI for about 1.5 years. Really enjoy it. I am a lead experience architect, which means I am one of the leads in our design and strategy group. Effective UI is a UX technology agency that creates transformational digital products. So one of the things that I would say our passion is really complex projects that aren't just, we have wireframes, can you skin this? It's, we have a foundational problem in our organization that we need help solving. We have offices in New York and Manhattan, in Rochester, and here. And we work with a huge slew of different clients. I mentioned a couple that I work with up there, Time Warner, but you can see a bunch of other really big names. But I would also say we work with a lot of smaller names and nonprofits. I recently finished a project, probably about half a year ago actually, with Hawaii Appleseed, which is a small nonprofit legal justice organization. So everything from big to small. That all make sense? Yes. All right. So what is user experience? Right? That's the $1 million question. It's a big buzzword. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone needs a user experience. They need a guy who can do it, or a girl who can do it. And I think it started out and it's really just exploded. And I think to a certain degree it's become a bit of a nebulous term. But I'd like to talk with you about what I think it is. So there's a great quote here. So the central premise of user-centered design is that the best designed products and services result from understanding the needs of people who use them. And the kernel I get out of this is, and it makes sense, is that user experience is user-focused, right? It's not expert design, it's user-focused. The principles of understanding your user are inherent and pivotal in working in a user experience process. And so that's about, inherent in listening to your user. It's also about not just listening to what they say, right? It's not just, I want this, but it's observational. It's watching what they do, talking with them, understanding what their needs are, what their unmet needs are, and giving them, I like to say, giving them what they need as opposed to what they want, because those might not always be the same. Another great quote here is, the design of anything independent of medium or a cross device with human experience as an explicit outcome and human engagement as an explicit goal. So I mentioned this already, but user experience is not just about digital. It's about all of the different touch points you can have. And what I think this says, and what it says to me, is that the user experience is about user touch points, whether that's with another user or whether that's with a system. So if you think about a bank, what's the user experience of Bank of America, right? The touch points are not just the website. If you say, what's the user experience of Bank of America, it's not just the website. It's when you walk into the bank, what's the structure of the bank? It's the teller, it's the mortgage broker, it's the manager, it's the 5 different phone lines you can call in. It is the website, it's their social media. All of these touch points play into your perception of the user experience. You may have a fantastic, if anyone has a fantastic experience buying plane tickets, but if the plane is late or the person at the desk is rude, right, that ruins your user experience and your perception of that brand. So when we think of user experience, I want you to think broadly about it in terms of all of the touch points that you have, and not just about the digital ones. Even if we focus down to a website, there are many touch points within there. If you want to build in support, is support coming from someone? Is there chat? Is there a phone that's going to lead you to somewhere? And if you do call someone, are they going to be able to easily see where you are in this process? Do they have knowledge of who you are and what your context is? Or every time you talk to someone, do you have to repeat yourself? Hopefully that makes sense, and you've hopefully not experienced that, though I'm pretty sure you all have. I have. It sucks. The way I like to tell the story is relatively new. It sort of started as human factors, which was much more about product design, much more about physical things. Then when the internet came around, it would turn to more about usability. And as I see usability, it's about fixing things that aren't working. It was always responsive and not proactive, right? And now user experience I see is much more proactive. And as I see it, it's this difference here. When the web first came out, just getting something that was functional was pretty awesome. And getting it to be reliable and, dare I say, usable, was of course for high fives for everyone, just because we could make it happen. We're way past that now, right? And the user experience lives up here in being convenient and being pleasurable. So it's something that, I don't always need to enjoy online banking, right? I don't expect it to be enjoyable, but I expect it to be able to understand my needs and make it easy for me to do the things that I want to do, which isn't usable, but I think there's more to it. And I'll talk a bit about it. But the magic dust up here of meaningful, and even I struggle to understand what that means, because it's so different for every project. What is meaningful when you're doing an online application, like a login flow? What does meaningful mean? I think that varies based on who the users are. I think that varies based on what the stakeholder needs are. But that's what we're aiming for. I don't think there's a definition for what meaningful means. I think it changes every project. But I think that's what you should be striving for. I like to say there's no discussion about UX that doesn't have a Venn diagram. For those of you who've been in UX discussions before, there are hundreds of them, and in previous presentations I've actually shown like 30. But this one I think is good, because when we talk about UX, and I think it hits home a bit of the idea that I'm talking about in terms of UX, is it's not just visual design or information architecture. It does encompass interaction design, but it also encompasses industrial design and architecture, and how mechanical engineering and electrical engineering also play into design activities. That's how I see it. I know that when you're looking at on Twitter for user experience jobs, they always tend to be digital. But they don't need to be, because this process of engaging users, having a user-centered process, isn't about digital, it's about design, right? And design is a very big thing that applies to everything from creating a book to creating a website to designing a film. Most of those things I can't do, but I like to talk about it. So when we talk about user experience, the key word obviously is user. And I want to dispel a myth that user experience is just about the user. because it's not. Because I would not have a job if I was just saying this is what the user wants, screw your business goals, to hell with the technology that you have, right? It's, as a user experience agency, what we really do is work here in the middle of trying to get the technology goals and the business goals and the user goals all to come together. But I think the difference and the lens that we look at it is different from the way most other organizations and perhaps like your standard advertising or design agencies look at it, is because most organizations, in having worked with other organizations, they'll look at the business goals first and say, this is what we want to do. These are the options for it. How are we going to get the users to do this, right? And they focus on the user goals after they've determined the business goals. Or they say, this is what our technology can do, right? These are the things we have. If I have a hammer, this is how we're going to hammer. The way we like to start is starting with the user. So we talk about these are all of the user needs. These are all the opportunities for the user. These are all of the user behaviors that we can piggyback on. How do we meet business goals by serving the customer, by piggybacking on the customer behaviors, by meeting the customer needs, by allowing the customers to achieve their goals? So I understand that's a nuance. But my job, primarily as in working through the UX process, is to make sure that everything is going through that customer lens first, and we're achieving something that the customer is going to want to engage with, while still allowing achievement of the business goals and technology goals. We may decide that this is the technology that we have, and we're going to do this, and then we talk to the users and say, well, realistically, we don't actually even need this technology, even though in some organizations they say, well, this is the technology we have, so we're actually going to use it. So it's the lens we look through, and I think even though it seems like a nuance, it's actually really important. So I hear a lot about what UX is and is not, reading a lot of articles about it, and everyone has a different opinion. Mine is just one of millions. But I do want to talk a bit about what I think UX is not, because it aggravates me, and I don't want you guys to believe it. UX is not, and I know I said this, but UX is not about giving people what they want. I don't know, how many people here have seen the Simpsons episode? Yeah, a few. So you know what I'm talking about, right? Homer's brother, long-lost brother, owns a car manufacturer, and he gives Homer the keys to the building and says, build whatever car you want. And he comes up with this, which I think has a popcorn machine in it, and it's completely ridiculous and awesome, and I want one. But no one's going to buy it because it's unwieldy to build and too expensive. User experience is not about giving the keys to the manufacturing plant to the user and say, do whatever you want. There's a lot of reading between the lines. What's a good example of that? So a good example of that is when you're doing user, looking at an ATM and saying, do you, and you have a user up at the ATM, you're doing observational research, and maybe you ask them, so what do you think about ATMs? And they'll say, oh, I really hate it. It's so out of the way. But realistically, it's also still a convenience for them because it's there, right? And even though they say, oh, I hate it, they go every week, right? It's the difference between listening to an aspiration, listening to an attitude, which can change, right? Attitudes change about things all the time, versus observing a behavior. Even though they say they hate it, they're going to the ATM every week. Even though they hate the restaurant that's downstairs, in their building, they're going every other day because of the convenience factor. So the attitude about it isn't as important to design for as understanding what their actual behaviors are. Does that make sense? Yeah, some nodding heads? Yes. Okay, thank you. So I do want to dispel this myth that it really isn't about focus groups and aspirations. It isn't about asking people, what do you want, and then giving it to them. There is a very thick layer of analysis that goes on top of it, and that's built into the process. So it's not a task or a phase. I really hate when someone says, hey, here's a wireframe. Can you go UX this for 20 minutes? I don't know what to do with that. You can't go like, I want my magic UX wand. In my previous job I had one, I would just go like, ta-da, it's been UX'd. It's great. But it doesn't happen like that. It's not a one-time thing. It's not a phase in a project. We're going to do design and then we're going to do UX. It's not a task. We have 20 hours here for UX. It is a Zen way of thinking. Yeah, not quite. But it's a process. It's not just something you can have a guy do. It's built into the ethos of the organization. Do you want to be user-focused? We have people called UX designers, right? And they serve an important role. But if the rest of the organization doesn't believe in the user-centered process, there's only so much you can do. Not saying you can't do it. I know people who are alone and who are pushing and making a lot of progress. But as a whole, to really achieve a good user experience, you need buy-in from across the organization. It's not expert design. People who have spent a lot of years in UX, and I wouldn't discredit them as UX experts, who take a problem, they design it, and they give it to the client without actually engaging with the user, is not a user experience process. It's someone who's done a lot of user experience work doing expert design. I think that's an important distinction as well. And it's not usability. I want us to think beyond usability, and what I mean by that is it's not finding problems. It's about understanding an experience, finding problems, and finding opportunities. It's about how do we make something meaningful, and sometimes meaningful is making it less worse, and sometimes meaningful is making it more good. So what is it? It is research-based, right? There is a lot of research, qualitative and quantitative research. It can be observational research, it can be interviews, it can be usability testing to set a benchmark, it can be concept testing, it can be customer workshops where you have customers come in and you're actually working hand in hand with them to do ideation around how to solve problems. There's no one way to do research, but the core idea is that you're bringing in outside understanding. I would also say that when we're talking about research, it's not just about the user, you're also researching your client, because your client is sometimes as much an enigma as the customer, or the client's customer, because you need to understand their goals, you need to understand their needs and how you're going to solve their problems too. In terms of true UX, that's not the thrust of it, but for a UX agency, that's our job. It's not just solving the user problems, but it's how do we make our clients happy, right? And sometimes there's stuff that's outside of the UX design process that still falls on our plate, because we need to make everyone happy. So I talk about it's a process, and I talk about it's cross-departmental. Having a UX designer does not make a UX process. So who owns the UX process? So I want to talk a little bit about Effective UI and how we do it. Just to give you one example, there are a couple of different models. So Effective UI, this is our mantra. So we're passionate about adapting technology and systems to human behavior and not the other way around. And that's a really nice way of saying this again, right? We're passionate about adapting this to fit this, as opposed to fitting this into this. The way we work is we have these 5 teams. When we start a project, we have a lead. Like me, I would be in the design strategy group. We have a lead from every team engaged in the kickoff and throughout the process. So we have someone from our insights research group, we have someone from design, we have someone from technology, and someone from engagement management and account management, I'll talk about what those are in a second, involved, because even though I am the lead of a design and strategy, I do not own the user experience, right? We all have strengths in our domain. I'm not a coder. I can talk about animation and transitions and even like color theory. I'm not a visual designer, right? We all have strengths in each of these different elements that brings strength to our user experience process. I don't own it. I may own a part of it, but our organization owns the user experience. And no one in the team can say, well, user experience isn't my thing, I just want to get it done quickly. So we have Customer Insight, which does generative and evaluative research, right? They go out, they'll do in-context research, they may do qualitative research. They gather the insights, which help us set a strategy. It precedes design. It may be requirements gathering, it may be creating an MVP. We have the Design and Strategy group, which does everything from creating that UX strategy, supporting research, information architecture, interaction design, visual design, prototyping. We work closely with the development team, which actually creates the code. We may do that in a very tightly knit agile format. We may do that in waterfall. It really depends on who the client is. And then our engagement management team is split into 2 groups. One is account management, one is engagement management. You may all be familiar with this. Engagement managements tend to be a little more tactical, very similar to project management. With smaller clients, they're the ones that own the relationship and make sure I'm doing what I'm told. The account management for some of our larger clients, like the Time Warner account, we have an account manager because we're working with lots of different streams of the organization. We're working with their some of their operations team, we're working with someone in their tech team, we're working with some of the different product teams. So we have someone who can see a vision over all of that, and I as an LXA also work with that account management to understand the whole big picture. So I don't want to go too much into depth on this, but the key point here is we have a pretty diverse team because one person can't do everything, But all of these people are key to owning the user experience, right? And when I talk about the user experience here in terms of the agency, that includes the business needs and the technology needs. Because if we don't meet those needs, then we can't meet the user needs either. So I want to talk a little bit about the user experience design process. Oh, no, all right. First thing I'm going to do, before I talk about that, is I'm going to stop talking for a minute. I'm going to have a sip of tea. And I'm going to ask you guys, have any of you worked with a UX agency? And what have been your, what do you think has been successful? And what do you think have been some of the struggles you've had?
What was our user experience?
What was your user experience with the user experience? Yes, user experience agency. No one? You're all prospective new clients? The gentleman in the front suggested that perhaps designers might not be grounded at times. I never experienced that. But yeah, right? And I think that's one of the nuances of working with, I suppose, any agency, but when we work together as a team, you saw up here we have all those roles. There are roles that focus on bringing in the voice of the user, and there are roles that focus on bringing in the voice of the business. There are roles, so our technology lead, we have them at the beginning of the process when we're just doing strategy, because we need to know what's the lay of the land. Can they actually do any of this, right? Is there a transformation in their technology team, right? In their how they work even, right? Do they have the capabilities to maintain this that we need to understand before we start? So part of the role of any design agency, but something we certainly consider is how do we make our clients successful? And it certainly is listening to their requirements, understanding what they need, and making sure that as we push and as we do loudly be the voice of the user, we're going to do that in a way that, I'm not going to say we're not going to push them, because I will. I don't want them to be like, no, this is what we have. But we're going to push them, but we want to make sure they're successful in the end. And in terms of being technology focused, exactly I think as we push, we're helping teams who don't typically think about the user to bring in that perspective. And one of the nice things that you see is on the first engagement we have with the client, it's hard. It's sometimes a hard process to understand. Why do I need to talk to all these users? I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've been using this application every day. I know what I'm talking about. Here, I'll draw a wireframe on a napkin, just do this, right? Not exactly like that. That's a caricature, but that happens. And after you do the first engagement and the second engagement, it's amazing. I'm continually amazed. Oh, are we doing testing? We really need to do testing coming from the client, because they start to see the value of it. It's sometimes one of those things that you actually have to see and engage to really understand the value. I can talk about usability testing for several hours, but until you sit and watch a usability test, it's hard to understand the value. And one of the things I personally love about usability testing, even though you're not supposed to test your own stuff, we do it sometimes, is when my assumptions are wrong. I love being proved wrong, right? And that's the value right there of the user-focused process. I have assumptions as a designer. This is the coolest shit ever. And then I go in and it bombs, right? People hate it doesn't work. That's the value. We all have assumptions. We all think this is going to be the shiz, and it's not always. Yes, sir.
So in the context of Startup Week,
yeah,
we have a streamlined flow for us in startups, so that we can engage you, because I want to engage you, right? So
yeah,
I start with the customer, right? Doesn't matter what the technology is if the customer can't use it.
So as an agency, so I'm going to talk a bit about the process, and a lot of this you can do on your own. I mean, if you're talking about engaging effective UI, there are a couple of things. We're a boutique agency. We help a lot of big clients. We also help small clients. So we do a couple of things. We can help with design, obviously. We can help with strategy. So digital transformation, or how do I even start thinking about this digital thing I want to build. We also do education. So if you want to do user testing, but you don't want to pay us to do it, we can come and enable you, right? We can teach you and your whole team how to do testing yourselves. And that's one of the things I particularly love. I was a teacher for a while of UX, and also worked in the education industry. That's one of the things I find most powerful, because I love enabling other people to do it. Call us in for the hard stuff, but the simple stuff I'm happy to help people do themselves. Let's talk a bit about the UX design process. This is the way it used to be. For some people, this is the way it still is, right? I have an idea, I'm gonna draw it up, I'm gonna send it to the client, they like it or not. If they like it, we just do it. That's not obviously the way it should be done. This is the way we do things. I wanna preface this as well. I think even internally, we probably have 3 or 4 ways of labeling these things, and I'm sure you've probably seen other design processes that have slightly different names. It's all pretty much the same. I'm going to talk through each of these steps, though, and what they mean. Each of these steps could be a month or 2 months long, and they each could be a day or 2, right? It really varies based on what you're trying to achieve. The first is empathize. So hopefully, I mean, you've all heard empathy is really important in the design process. It essentially means, well, obviously feeling empathy for your customers, for the business you're working with, understanding what's going to make them feel good, what makes them feel bad, how do you help them be successful. So that empathy for your client is doing benchmarking, going in and doing workshops with them about what are their goals, what are they trying to get out of this. The different clients that we have, what are their personal goals? What are they, each one, the CMO, the CEO, the middle manager, they all have different things that they're trying to achieve. How do you make each one of them successful? How do we identify what are the metrics for those success? For customer, and also like, you know, the typical kickoff workshop, how do you define the goals, the priorities? For the customer, it's quantitative or qualitative research. We strongly prefer qualitative research. You get a lot out of the observation. So you conduct observational research. You maybe even conduct usability testing of the current state of the system that they have, or a heuristic evaluation, which is essentially an expert review to set the current state to create assumptions, right? The best part of empathize is we now have these insights about things that need to change, and we also have assumptions about we think this thing works, or we don't think this thing works, or we really want to build this, is this going to happen? Those assumptions lead into definition, where after you've done that research, you validated some of that, and you construct a worldview, right? You construct a strategy for what this thing is going to be. You take all of the research and you take all of the insights and you synthesize it. And you synthesize it into things like personas. Personas help you understand who your users are. Because if you say, our users do this, then you're making a blatant generalization, right? Because our users is not a monolithic group. There's no organization that has a monolithic group of users unless they're only like one of them, you know? Like if I'm the only user, then I can say the users do this. Otherwise, you need some way of talking about your users, and that's what personas do, right? Personas are a tool that help you say, we think we have these 3 or 4 groups of people, we have research that validates this, they all have different problems, how do we solve their problems individually? We have journey maps. Journey maps help you understand the bigger picture. Journey maps can be just of your project. They can be, this is where we want to be 10 years down the line. They can be, these are all the steps we currently have, and here's where the pain points are, and here's where the opportunities are. It's another tool to visualize the data that you have to help you prioritize what you do next. Task models, user flows, workshops, creating requirements documents, and all of that other documentation. These are all additional outcomes of the definition phase. You know, you probably heard of the MVP, right? Particularly for startups. What's the minimum viable product? What is the smallest thing we can do? That comes out of this define stage. You have an entire backlog of, this is like phase 25. Phase 1, based on our research, based on our definition of the strategy and the journey we want to create, the needs we need to fulfill, this is the minimum viable product we need to create. Prototyping, so ideation, so I jumped ahead because, man, it's okay, it's gonna be okay. Deep breath. Because you know, like on here I have like the screen I'm looking at and the next screen, and then I get confused.
We're all judging.
Thank you. Good. All right, write down all your judgments on Post-it notes, put them up on the wall. We'll prioritize later. We're going to talk about ideation. So ideation is once you've defined what that strategy is, what is this thing we're creating? At this point, we're still at big problems. We know we need to create an easy way to get people signed up. We know we need a simple way to get people to complete the mortgage process. Right? It's not where does this button go? That doesn't happen yet. If you jump straight from personas to where does this button go, you're skipping a massive step. This is still big picture, like how do we solve these fundamental problems that people are having? Or how do we fulfill these fundamental opportunities that we've seen? So really, ideation is about thinking solutions. You probably brainstorming, right? I mean, that's the buzzword, and it's essentially one of the key activities here. But it's about solving big problems, and the way to do that is, well, there are actually many ways to do that. I mean, we can talk about sketching, we can talk about ideation workshops, we can even talk about concept testing. So once you do have ideas, how do you validate those ideas? There's a really good book whose name I forget, which isn't helpful, but it's I think it's the keys to creativity, something like that. I can tell you guys later. It's in a blog post I wrote, but essentially it talks about a lot of the some of the myths of creativity. The fact that creativity only happens when everyone gets in a room and sits down in a group and there are no rules and you put a bunch of Post-its up on the wall, right? And scientifically, that's false. Creativity does not necessarily happen in a group. You can be much more creative as an individual. Creativity does not happen when there are no rules. Structure is actually really important to creativity. You define a problem, let's solve this specific problem, and then we can move on. Friction helps creativity. You don't need to be like, oh, that's a good idea anymore. You can be like, no, that's not a good idea. And here's why. And then let's solve that problem, right? I'm going to try and think of an example. I'm going to fail. But all right, we'll keep moving. But the idea is, and like I hope that makes sense, right? I think there's this idea that you need to be, every idea is a good idea. That's what I was looking for. Every idea is a good idea is not necessarily true. There are some bad ideas. You don't want to say, hey, that was a shit idea and you're an idiot, right? That doesn't help. But you could say that's not a good idea because we know we have these constraints. Well, that's a constraint is an assumption. Well, how do we work around it, right? That friction is helpful in pushing ideas past where they are. You hear about, well, ideas are going to build on ideas. You need that friction to help move past the idea because you need to create a problem to solve. I can talk about ideation for hours. I did this morning. I had a talk about ideation. The key goal is don't get stuck on one idea. Ideation is not about I have this idea in my head, I'm going to draw it down and we're done. It's about having a massive quantity of ideas, narrowing that down based on your research, narrowing that down based on your business stakeholders, and then validating them. Testing them with actual users. Concept testing, yes, this is a good idea, no, this is a bad idea. This idea, if you tweak it like this, is going to be so much better. That's the twist on the UX twist on ideation. Then we do prototyping. Prototyping is iterative, right? You design, you test, you design, you test. Lower fidelity, medium fidelity, higher fidelity. Fidelity matters. Choose wisely. Who are you showing this to? Are you showing this to the CEO? Make it shiny. Are you showing this to your design team partners? Don't spend 2 days creating one screen. Get it down in a sketch and talk about it. Are you showing it to users? You probably need to get it enough so they understand it. But are you trying to get feedback on visual design, or are you trying to get feedback on flow? Think really carefully about what you test. If you go too far, people are going to give you feedback on things you don't want, right? That's always a struggle that we have. And it's actually really annoying. We're testing this thing, and there's a button there that just we put in because we know we're going to have that function at some point, and people fixate on it. And you'll find that out really quickly after your first session or two, and we end up just deleting the button even though it needs to be there, because you want to make sure that what you show people is what you want feedback on. Focus on the big picture. Start with sketching, then wireframes, then higher fidelity, and then visual design. I mentioned a little bit about agile versus waterfall. Do you want to prototype with a designer and a dev together? There's a great use case for that. Do you want a prototype where you do all wireframes and then you do visual design after? There's a use case for that. That again is a whole other talk, which I don't necessarily want to get into. I think one of the key parts of my job, right, and so sort of stepping back for a second, one of the key parts of my job is there are always options. How do we ideate? What tasks do we do? How do we research? Who do we research? What user groups do we go to? How do we interact with the client? At what cadence? Do we meet with them daily, weekly, monthly? One of the key elements of the UX agency is to make those decisions, because it's different for every client. It's different for every project with the client. I have one client, we've been doing it one way, where it's been basically a waterfall process, and now we're going to move to an agile process because it's a different project. They have a lot more people involved, and we need to move a little more quickly. In any design process, I suppose there are a lot of activities. One of the key things that we do and that we try and I suppose we try and hide. It's one of the more difficult parts of our job, and we try and make it look easy, is figuring out what's the right thing to do at the right time and how do we make this client happy. Because every client is different. I have a client who wants to meet every day for an hour, and I have a client who doesn't want to talk to me until we're done. And there's a negotiation with each of those, because neither of those are necessarily right or wrong. And then testing. And so testing and monitoring is test designs with real customers, right? And I've been banging on about this. It's not just the client. Don't just show the client. The client is not the right user. The client should see it. The client should have feedback, but the client is not every user. That's why you have personas, right? The client may be one of those personas, but you have customers who are probably smart, and you have customers who probably aren't, right? And you need the dummies to be able to use this thing too. You have customers who are going to be kids. You have customers who are going to be colorblind. You have customers who may have some other disability. Test with real people. Don't find a small niche segment. The more you obviously want to get people in the middle, but you also want to get people on the extremes. You find I've done testing previously with people who are blind, and the things you learn are fabulous, right? About how the page is structured, and there's a lot of code stuff as well about how code is structured that's helpful. But don't look for breadth. I think that's the key message here. Don't just look for the super user. They're going to give you one perspective, but you're going to do a disservice to the rest of the users.
Question here.
Yeah.
So in terms of software, are we testing just the design, or are we testing a functional prototype in this stage?
It's up to you. I mean, we're testing all the way through. At this point, I suppose we could say we're testing a functional prototype or a full HTML code, but you should be testing all the way through. You should be testing a concept in ideation. You should be testing strategy and engaging users in some of the definition of strategy. You should certainly be testing sketches and wireframes and visual designs if you have the ability. And you should be testing at the end. And you've probably heard the mantra, test early, test often. It's wicked true, right? Because it's stupid expensive to fix something once it's in code compared to I have it on a sketch and I can just erase it and change the wording, or I can move this button here, or we can add in this function on a wireframe. If you have the option of testing, do it early. Do it early. That's my advice, and probably every UX professional would say the same. What you don't see up here is that there's a line from test back to ideate, but as well as test back to empathize. Because in truth, as you've probably seen for the many different visualizations of the design process, it's cyclical. So as we're testing, what we're essentially doing is building more empathy, right? And we're looking for more pain points that we need to attack, and we're looking for more opportunities, a new product line, a new feature that we can add in that's going to make this thing easier. We have a search. Well, we can make a predictive search. How do we design that? How do we structure if it's multiple different types of content? I mean, so many different things, right? Testing is not the end of the road, it's just the beginning of the process again. The other thing, two more things I want to talk about. One, when you're testing, I like testing multiple options. I think that's cool. I like, if the client has an assumption about what they really like, and I have an assumption of, I think they're wrong, I want to test this, test them both. There's no reason not to. We've had times where even like internal on our design team, we have different views about what's the best way to do it. Test them. Testing is the best way to validate assumptions and to fix disagreements. I can't stress that enough, and I think that's true throughout. It's true throughout. The other thing I want to talk about is, in terms of startup week, to the gentleman's question, testing, we do testing that takes 3 to 4 weeks, and it can be quite costly. You can do testing that takes an hour, and you can just go and show it to a few people. You can go to Union Station and show it to a few strangers. You can show it to some people in your office, even if it's not the right customer base, right? Showing it to a human being is better than nothing. So if you can't do the full usability testing, show it to somebody. Get some feedback. Don't live in a silo. Okay. So again, I've been blabbering on for a while about big picture stuff. This is user experience, and this is how we do it. But what's the point, right? I mean, we go through all this stuff. What do our clients get out of it, and what do our really, it's what do our clients get out of it? They're our main customer that we need to satisfy. I want to satisfy the user. But if I don't satisfy my client, it's not going to get built. So we have a few outcomes that we try and achieve throughout our process. So first is we have a common understanding of people and their needs so we can define an experience that meets those. So when we're talking about empathy, we go out and do research, but the fact that I have all that knowledge isn't helpful. I need to communicate that to the entire team. And when I say team, I mean my entire team as well as the client team. We all need to be on the same page. We're all going to be making decisions down the road. And if they don't understand this key facet of one of the personas, about how this persona, they say they want this, but really their need is much deeper. They need connection. They need to feel trust, whatever it is, right? It's that sharing. So we have a common understanding of people. The common understanding is really key. It's not about I get this and then I do. It's about we're on a journey together and we're able to do that research and communicate it. The next is we have organizational alignment on a vision so we can plan and craft the details of the experience. So we've come out of the research, we've come out of the empathy stage, and we're starting to define and do analysis, and we have a common understanding of what we're trying to achieve. When you come out of research, the client may have assumed we want to do this and it needs to be an app. And we may have come back and said, look, we've done all this research, it actually just needs to be a postcard. Or whatever, right? We need to have those conversations. We all need to be aligned on what we're trying to achieve, what does the research substantiate, and how are we ensuring that we're achieving the client goals. So we need that alignment on that vision. You know, we'll call it a strategy. That could be a journey map. There are a lot of forms a deliverable could take. That's super important for us. Because if we go down the road and we design something trying to achieve what we have in our heads, and the client has something else in terms of what they're trying to achieve in their heads, we're screwed. The third is for clients, we've created alignment with users, tech, and biz on detailed definition of the experience so that the experience can be implemented. So once we have this big picture, we've gotten down more into the details of what does the user need, what does the business need, what does the business need, what does the tech group need, and how we're going to do that. You might think of that as a requirements document or an MVP or even really introductory sketches so everyone understands this is what this thing is going to be. This is approximately how big it's going to be. This is also where we can really get a good idea of how much is this thing going to cost? How much time is it going to take to make? What's the simplest thing we can do to meet all of these? What's phase 2? What's phase 3? Again, this is super important for us as a gateway for us to achieve this alignment before we start moving forward. I don't want to start designing something and say, okay, we're done. And the client said, well, wait, where's all this? So as an outcome of the definition phase, this is something that we need to have with our clients. We have delivered useful, usable, desirable experience that the user so that the user engagement is optimized. We've made cool shit that people like, right? That's clearly an important goal, and we're using all the good words here, right? Usable, desirable, user engagement is optimized. Basically, we've made stuff that the client likes that's going to meet their goals, and we've made stuff that's easy for the user to use and that they're going to want to engage with, or at least have no issue engaging with. That they're going to be able to easily meet their needs. And lastly, we've crafted the infrastructure so that clients can measure adoption and continuously improve their experience. So we talked about the design process. What I'm talking about now is really the project process. Because this is a little bit to do with the design, but this is also something that we as an agency, and I as a design lead, need to ensure that we enable. This is something that we as an agency and I as a lead need to be able to ensure that the client is going to be successful, right? And that's not just, okay, here's the designs or here's the code, peace, we're out. I want to make sure if I want more work from this client, that they're happy, that they feel enabled to continue, that they feel enabled to measure what they have and to continue pursuing updates. Do they have the expertise in their technology team to maintain whatever code we've given them, right? If they don't, have we set up a process for us to help them with that? This is not necessarily part of the design process, but it's part of being a good partner, which is what we try and do. Yes?
How often do you get a chance to come back 6 months or a year later to see if it actually worked or not?
Not nearly often enough. Honestly, not nearly often enough. We try. What the way I think it works best, honestly, is it's hard to build in. We have contracts where we say, okay, we're going to continue helping you. I think the way it works best is that we have relationships with organizations. Like I've been working with Time Warner and Freeman for about a year. And as we're working with them and we're working with other groups, we're still in touch with the first project leaders, and we're talking with them, and we're saying, hey, here's another opportunity we saw, or what about that thing we once talked about? Unfortunately, clients have budgets, and it's hard to say, well, we're going to come back and talk about this is the value we're going to find. It's about just part of having a relationship and just being a good partner. I think that's probably a good word for it. Some of that isn't, some of that is just on the account. It's not necessarily billable work, but it's just we want to make sure that you're having a good experience, because if you have a good experience, you're going to want us to come back. It's part of our user experience for our clients. So I want to talk about it really more simply. I know that was a lot of words to look at. There are kind of three big things. Three big reasons. This is the only slide where I put in a lot of cool animations. So I really wanted to. I kept it to one. So thank you for that. I'm going to do it again. It's great. Thank you. Thank you. It's really validating. It's a good user experience, right? It's the little things. Anyway, so there are three key reasons why you want to engage a user experience agency. First is money. And when I talk about money, I mean risk. Because if you go down the path of just meeting business needs or just meeting your technology needs, you're going to release something and your users are going to use it, and 95% of the time there's going to be a problem, and you're going to have to go back and fix something. And fixing something is expensive. But if you design it right the first time and you take the time, and yes, it's a little more time, yes, a little more process, it's going to be better in the end. You're going to thank yourself for having spent that time up front. And that's probably a truism for most things, right? You rush through something and you realize, man, if I just spent a little more time setting this up in the beginning, it would have been much more efficient down the road. I think time as well, right? And again, comes back to risk. There's much less time spent fixing things after it's done. I think those first two are tied together. The second thing, which I think is really underreported in the news, is that peace of mind is really important. When I hand something off to a client, they're often not the final stop, right? They'll have a boss, or their boss will have a boss. Even the CEO has a board he needs to go to. They're going to take something and someone's going to say, hey, what about that button? Hey, why didn't we do this? Hey, why didn't this make it in there? We talked about this 3 months ago. The value of the user experience process is that everything is justifiable. We start with research and we create a strategy based on our understanding of the technology, the business, and the users, right? With the users' needs and behaviors and goals coming first. So we've substantiated our strategy based on that research. And as we develop that strategy, we develop pain points and opportunities, and we create ideation based on those. So we can point to why do we have these solutions? Because we have personas which have these pain points. And as we continue, we create designs. Well, we have these designs because we tested these concepts, and we understand that these features are actually really valuable. I can show you video clips from our concept testing of why this thing is really good and how people are going to use it. And then we create the UI and we do usability testing. Well, why didn't you have this feature? It actually tested really poorly, so we changed it into this. And so it really is, as I see it, peace of mind that when you present this to someone, and when I certainly present it back to the client and they take it on, it's peace of mind that this isn't just like, blue sky, here's a really pretty design. Everything here is justifiable. That's what I personally kind of like about the UX process. And that, I think, is an incredible value for a business. It justifies the expense, right? What's the return on investment? Well, not the return on investment, you can measure that, but what's to justify the expense? Well, this is like a clear pathway. This is a clear description of how we got to where we are and why we did. I can go back to my archive and read you some user quotes. I can go back to my stakeholder interviews with your CMO and CIO and talk about what their needs were and how we achieved those. Yes? That was the last one. Okay, so, wow. I feel like it's been like 2 hours already. Not much longer. I know you're getting antsy. I want to talk a little more about some tactical stuff that you can take away and actually do. I know this is kind of big picture. But first, what I would love for you to do is talk amongst yourselves. Talk about, like, if you just turn to your neighbor and talk about what are some of the common problems you face if you have a digital interface or experience you work with. What are some of the common pain points that you have? So I'll give you 2 minutes to talk amongst yourselves, and then I'll ask a couple of people to volunteer. Don't be bashful. Turn, talk. All right, my psychic powers are still working. I might just bring it back. Cool. Thank you all for indulging me and letting me have another sip of my tea. So does anyone want to volunteer? If you're just to summarize in like a few words, like what are some of the key problems you're having with your things? Yeah, I mean like Craigslist. An example, right? I don't want to say user experience is not about beautiful design, but it's not only about beautiful design. Beautiful design is not the end goal. It's getting something that people are going to use and to achieve their goals easily. And if that's better in a much simplified design, then why not, right? If it's really about function and I don't necessarily need to feel like I'm ensconced in this beautiful thing to achieve that goal, then that's great. And you validate that through testing. User experience is not like, I completely agree with you. And I think that's something you get through validation. And I just want one more point to that. I mean, everyone points to the Apple, right? Steve Jobs says he didn't test, he didn't do focus groups, right? I don't do focus groups either, right? I don't go and ask people what they want. But Steve Jobs also took how many years to release the iPhone, right? They tested the crap out of that, and they had a lot of potential users in Apple. They just didn't do it through usability testing outwardly. And even the mighty iPhone is now on version 6S or whatever, right? Like you can't say, oh, the iPhone came out and it's perfect. It's not. It's been updated. Technology changes, time change. The way you gather that insight may vary. Anyway, I'm sorry. It's actually a great point. I mean, the difference between how do you design for a novice user and an expert user. An expert user might be fine with the command line. They know all the codes, right? How do you provide a program to allow, even just creating HTML for someone who's been doing it for 10 years or someone who's starting from scratch, right? There's a lot more help, a lot more infrastructure you can create for someone who has no idea what they're doing. But that's actually a good point, so it's something I'll touch on. Yes. Yeah, I think, there's a good point about finding the valid user that I probably didn't touch on in terms of personas. There's a big difference between marketing segments and user experience users. And even, there's this new, well, not new, but I think something that's been making the rounds. Like, we don't call them users, they're people, right? Users sounds like they're these automatons, these robots, these things that you need to give. They're people, they have names, right? They do things. But marketing tends to be segmented by demographics, by age, by do they have children, by how much do they make. If I'm designing a new ATM interface, I don't really care how much they make. I don't really care necessarily about gender. I don't really care, where they live. I care about their behaviors. There's this push, and people may have different opinions on this, about how do we design for millennials? Right? And I've been reading all these articles. Millennials are cost sensitive. Millennials want options. Millennials want this. I don't know any generation that's not cost sensitive. I don't know any generation that doesn't want options. It's really hard to paint these broad brushstrokes based on how old someone is. Certainly there are things that are true and things that are not. But the key, at least for design, is I can design for behavior. I can design for someone who uses the ATM to take out money versus some segment that really only uses the ATM to check how much money they have before they go to the bar, right? That second segment that second group may be a smaller segment and may be narrowed into demographics. But the demographics to me are not as important as the behaviors, because I can design for behaviors. I can't design for someone between the age of 20 to 30. If you just want to target, when you're starting out, you target one group, right? Nothing wrong with that. You start small and say, we're going to target these guys first, and then release it so everyone can use it, but then you continue to learn. Amazon couldn't possibly test every single group, right? They can't test someone who is colorblind in Indonesia who needs this very, who wants to get a Kindle book, like in whatever the use case, right? They can't test all of that. They can test the major ones. And as you go, you continue to build, and the new opportunity is maybe this younger group, or maybe the people in Kansas City. It's a hard question. I mean, and that to a certain extent is a business decision. How do I decide who, when you're starting with the startup, like how do you decide who's going to be the first user? Who am I designing the thing for, the MVP? You can't design for all users. It's impossible. Even Amazon can't design for all users, but certainly a startup can't. You have to make those hard decisions. And maybe when you go through the research, you do some validation and you say, oh, here's really the biggest opportunity. We talked with a few people in this age group. We have an assumption that there are differences between age groups. We have an assumption that there's differences between markets. It's okay to have those assumptions about demographics. Just don't make decisions based on, well, this demographic does this, unless you validated it. All right, I'm going to keep moving. This is the most important slide. It's because it's the one I forgot to delete. Keep judging. So there's one thing, I talked about talking a little more tactical. I think there are a couple of, some of the things you guys brought up were great. They're actually fairly big picture. There are a couple of things in here about how do you deal with different groups, and certainly in terms of how you deal with an expert versus a novice, which I want to talk about. But before I do, I just want to key you guys into a really cool resource I found. I take no credit for this. It exists on GitHub. As a design tool, it's something that I use, often not enough, but I use. It's not necessarily helpful in creating the first sketch, but when you're thinking about the overall user experience, it's not just the design, right? It's what's the animations? Have you thought about accessibility? What about waiting times? What if there's a lag between hitting the data and pulling it back? Do you have a little spinny wheel or something that tells people I'm thinking, right? The invention of that was huge. The times have shortened, but there's still wait times. How do you deal with errors? How do you deal with completed actions? Is there confirmation? All of these things that are, I would say, fairly easy to forget. Have you thought about actual language? Do you have a content strategy? Some of them are big, like the IA. Wireframing, probably fairly important. But I think it's a really cool tool. I recommend you have a look at it. The next thing I want to talk about, fairly briefly, are 5 principles of UX, and I think these are kind of more tactical things that perhaps you can take away with you and apply immediately. The first one is learnability. So by learnability, I mean ease for users to accomplish basic tasks the first time they encountered the design. Can people learn how to use your thing? And usability over time. Are they able to improve as time goes on? So the questions are like, how many features do you have? Is there a difference between a basic and advanced search? Are you supporting novice versus expert? Are you targeting the right users? Who are the right users and how do you differentiate? A great example I have of this is this. I'm terrible at the PlayStation and the Xbox. My left hand doesn't work. I can't push all the buttons. I just end up mashing. You all know what I'm talking about. Whereas the Wii, I can do this, right? I am a pro at Wii tennis. I got this. But after a while, do you get tired of the Wiimote? How do you move up? Well, maybe there are attachments. But if I've been playing PlayStation for years, I don't want a basic remote. I want all those buttons because it gives me that really rich, granular control, so I can slide tackle someone and take their knees out and give up a penalty kick in FIFA. But I think this is a really good example, right? When we first came out, it was a whole new demographic of people, a whole new group of people who wanted to play potentially, but this was a huge barrier. It wasn't the cost. The Wii wasn't necessarily much cheaper. It was how do I get into it? So I want to talk a little bit about wedding planning, which I've recently gone through. It's an amazingly difficult experience. What I'm going to show you is 2 different websites. And we're getting married, a lot of us. It's a new thing in Denver. I'm going to show you a website. What I'd like you to do is find how do we get started, right? We've come to this website. I want you to tell me how do we get started. When you find out how to get started, raise your hand, okay? Here's the first one.
Search box.
start here.
All right, it's taking a little bit of time. I know people are far away.
It's the find button. Drop.
Maybe search. It's a bit of a question. All right, I'm going to keep rolling here. I'm sorry if you missed it.
What do you mean by started though?
How,
Your first search
what
window,
do I do first?
sign up,
What do I do first? Yeah.
join free.
So I'm going to show another one, and then raise your hand when you find out what's the first thing you should do. How do you get started? Right? So do you see how that little thing in terms of design helps? I mean, you can make an argument that the first one is very busy. They have different goals. They're trying to achieve different things. But the learnability of how do I use this thing the first time I pick it up is much easier with this than it is with the previous one. Yes?
You call it learnability rather than intuitive design. Is that a very intentional choice, or
No.
no? So it's intuitive, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's intuitive is easy to use, but I think learnability it's more about not just being intuitive and easy to use the first time. It's also, as you go, how do things change over time, and how does the system grow with you? So, like with Amazon, good example, or I'm sure there are others where personalization is built in, right? It starts adding in, you might like this because of this, right? It helps you do things because it knows more about you, and as an expert user, you also might start using more advanced functionality. I think that makes sense? Yeah. So I think
No, I agree. I was just
there are a lot of words for it. Intuitive is a really good word for it. I think it's a little broader than intuitive. But next is efficiency. So once you learn how to use it, how quickly can you perform those tasks? I know how to do it, but even if I know how to do it, it can be like 5 or 6 steps. So how do we make it easy? So what's the depth of interaction? Is it appropriate and timely with feedback and labeling so I understand how to move through it? Is there appropriate affordance for the context? So I'm going to show 2 examples. The first is Microsoft, and I know, wait, calm the uproar. I'm showing Microsoft as a good example, I know. How many of you still go to the file menu to save something or to print, right? Or are you hitting Command P or Command S or Command Z? You still go to the file menu? Cool. So some people do, right? Seems like the majority not.
I go to the exit button.
The exit button?
When something's better.
Fair enough. But even on Google Docs, the mighty Google Docs, or any other thing, right? There are shortcuts built in. So I, as a novice user, can come in and I can navigate this file structure. But as an expert user, I have shortcuts that allow me to be more efficient, to skip parts of the process that a novice user wouldn't know. It does not impact the novice user's experience, but it allows me to be more efficient. Another example is this stuff here. Microsoft made some assumption about frequent stuff that people are going to use. That makes it potentially makes us more efficient, so we don't have to navigate through the deep menu structures to get to what we want to do. Efficiency is enabling people to do things easier, and not necessarily impacting, if you have one way of doing it for novice users, not necessarily impacting their pathway to make it more complex, but people who've been doing it repeatedly can have shortcuts. The next thing I want to talk about in terms of efficiency is context, and why context is really important. When I'm traveling, there are a lot of devices I could potentially choose. I'd much rather the book, because the book doesn't have batteries. And I can walk around and I can take it out, and that's fine. And when I get back to my hotel, I'm probably going to pull up my tablet and look at it, right? If I'm looking at the book and it says, oh, there's a thing over here and I have no idea where that actually is, I'm going to pull up my phone and look at the map. But I'll probably look at the map in here first. Now, that's just my behaviors. I'm not suggesting all of you have the same behavior. But the context of where you are and what you're doing matters. So you need to think about your device when we're talking about efficiency. Because if I'm out and looking for a map and the website is desktop only, and I need to navigate a desktop only thing on my phone, that's not efficient. That's not enabling me to move through this process quickly. Does that make sense? Why context matters? Context, device. Sometimes face-to-face is better than digital. I mean, all when we talked initially about the different mediums, important. Memorability. When users return to designs after a period of not using it, how easily can they reestablish proficiency? Does the system remember things for me, or do I need to remember them? If I go to Amazon, my cart is not empty. My cart still has all of the useless stuff I've put in it that I'm going to waste my money on because I think it's awesome. There's this new thing I'm going to share. There's this thing that comes in a little capsule. It's metal. I think it's gallium, and like it'll melt in your hand because the temperature of the metal is the melting temperature is lower than body heat. But once you put it down on the table, it gets solid again. Right? Who doesn't need that? Anyway. So do you remember the shortcuts when you come back? Really, recall versus recognition. Another one of the core principles of a good user experience is let the user do as little as possible. Well, all right. Is that me? Oh, really? Oh. Recall. I'm going to give an example of why that's not the case in a second, where we want the user to do more effort. But let's talk about Netflix here. If I just came back to Netflix and it didn't tell me that this is what I had recently watched, I would have to look for it. And I'd maybe have to go into a menu, but this is really easy. Not only does it tell me this is what I recently watched, but it shows me how far in I was. Not only does it do that, but it allows me to resume where I was before. So I don't have to remember what show I was watching and how far in I was. It seems like a simple thing, right? But we've come a long way in allowing systems to do that so the user doesn't have to remember all of these things. Another example is, and this seems like really simple, but keep me signed in. That's huge. Imagine if every time you went to anything you had to sign in for, you actually had to sign in. Like, I wouldn't. I'm lazy, but I think most people are. All right, the example I wanted to talk about in terms of when efficiency, or when people may want to do more work. I was doing a project for Philips, who in Australia makes coffee machines, the pod, the Keurig kind, and we were doing user research with a lot of different people, and there were people who abhorred this idea, the pod idea, because they are coffee purists. They wake up in the morning and they spend 20 minutes making their own coffee in like a $500 machine, right? I don't drink coffee, I can't fathom it. I might spend that time on orange juice, but not on coffee. But the thing is, they really engage in that experience, right? And so when you take that experience away from them, that was meaningful. Remember we talked about the top of the pyramid, meaningful? For some reason, engaging in making coffee is meaningful for them. So in that instance, you don't want to take that away from them. And the only way you know that is by actually talking to people. I'm sure there are hundreds of instances of that with different things, different hobbies, like the fantasy football. It could do it for you. It could draft your team for you. But where's the fun in that? I want to be engaged. I want it to be a little difficult because I feel there's something self-fulfilling about it. You only know that if you talk to people. You only know that if you research. The last thing is error management. Prevent things from going wrong, and if they do, help is the summation of that. Shit's gonna go wrong, but it shouldn't look like this, right? It should look like this. It should look like, hey, we have a little empathy. We realize something went wrong. We're sorry about that. But here are some things you can do so you're not at a dead end and you're gonna close the screen. So we can't find what you're looking for. You still have the menu. Here are some of our key pages. Keep browsing. We're gonna try and help you. I mean, this would even be better if it had like a search field there. Error management. If you can't prevent an error, don't make that the end of a user's experience. Don't make that the dead end. Similarly with Kindle, if you're reading your Kindle or on your tablet and on your phone, and suddenly you get back to your tablet and you realize you were on page 500, but the tablet last was on page 300, it mitigates that for you. It doesn't just put you back on the page where you last were here. It does a bit of, hey, this is what we know, can we help you? And really basic form management as well. I mentioned, I could talk for an hour about forms. It's never just a form, right? It's never, never, never just a form. Forms are incredibly important because for the most part, it's the conversion. It's the thing you need people to do to get what they want. They're everywhere, and people don't pay enough attention to them, and you lose money. You lose money or you lose engagement because you don't pay enough attention, because people get frustrated when they can't find why they're hitting the submit button and they don't see where the error is. Or they try and enter a new password 5 times, but it doesn't tell you what the rules are that you need to follow for the password because it's at the top of the page. There's so many things I can talk about. Error management in forms, huge, huge, huge. And basic satisfaction. How do users keep coming? How do you keep users keep coming back? How do you keep users? Yeah, that's English. How do you keep users coming back? Sorry, it's been a long day. What's meaningful? And I don't have an example of that. I mean, I have ideas, but it's really so different for every project. What do you guys think? Like, what are the things that you have to think about? What are some examples of achieving satisfaction that you can implement that makes people want to come back?
Well, you have your hierarchy. It's number one, is it useful?
Yep.
And then do I feel good while it's useful? I love being able to do my check deposit with my first bank app.
Yep.
But I hate doing it every time.
Yep.
Because it doesn't want to just take a photo of the check.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe.
Like, okay, it's perfectly lined up. I can't be any more steady, and it's telling you to be steady.
Yeah. So I mean, that's error management, right? But how do we? So it's usable. It will work.
It's your ATM thing, where it's like, but I keep using it because I love that I don't have to go to the bank.
Yeah. And maybe when you're done, it says "Have a nice day." And
Every time I do it, when I'm done, I'm like, yeah. No.
yeah. It prints out a coupon. I don't know. It's the magic sauce, right? Like I can't tell you how to create a good user experience. I can tell you some things you can think about, but there is no user experience that you can say, oh, here's a user experience. Just put that on that website and you're good, right? You can't do a user experience. It's research. It's understanding your users. It's understanding what are the little things that are going to be valuable to them.
The use has to be at least better than the alternative.
Yeah. Hopefully a lot better. Yeah. Some of the things to think about, right? Animations and transitions. Some people are really like, oh, that's really cute. Or, ooh, I like the way that moves, and you really feel engaged. There are notifications that keep you up to date about something that you might not have known, right? Like eBay, the auction's going to run out, so you get a notification, hey, this is about to run out. Like that's satisfying because you can now engage with the thing that's important to you. Shortcuts, keeping content current. So you go back to a blog, if it's 2 months old, that's not helpful, but like on Instagram, if that person you follow keeps posting new stuff of their hikes in the mountains, like that's really great, right? Instagram isn't about the app, it's about the photos and engaging with your friends or these people who you're trying to live vicariously through and failing. Yeah, I mean, it's about mapping directly to a need.
I think at a sort of very general level, it's about getting people to feel like they're in control.
Yeah, that's a great.
Sort of, is the product reliable? Do I feel that if I go there, I'm going to achieve what I go there to achieve? If I go to Amazon, will I find what I want? Will it arrive in 48 hours? If I'm using a product, does it work? At so many levels, if you feel like you're in control, I think that you come back.
Control is great. I mean, it's a great concept. And it's interesting. I mean, there's always a balance, right? Like I 100% agree. You give people control, and we talk about this in many of our projects. How do we give people control? And there's still a fine line of there's a lot of research about when you give people options. If you give them too many options, then it frustrates them, and they may actually just decide, well, I can't make a decision, so I leave. I am one of those people. I make spreadsheets for like every medium-sized purchase decision of like, tents. I have like about 30 tents with like all the different columns of how many doors does it have, how much does it weigh, does it have a fly into? Yeah, I know. My wife knows too. So there's that fine line between how much control do you give people and how much do you give them. Like on Uber, you can't choose which car you want. You get a car, right? How much control is enough control to allow people to have that experience and feel like they're getting what they need? It's still a balance. I just want to talk briefly about measuring and improving, because I know I've been talking for ages. I do that. So the first is designing for beta. It is an ongoing process. You're never done. You're always designing with the thought that there's going to be another design process that follows. Track your metrics and changes over time. And ask questions about why things change. Those insights are really important. Why, our mobile usage is skyrocketing. Our viewing on this page has declined. We have a spike here or a drop there. Why is that? What are your assumptions about it? And based on that, continue to do research. research those assumptions. Now people are using mobile. Go talk to some of those people or people who may be representative of that and say, okay, we have mobile. Why is this now happening? Maybe it's something in the news. Maybe there's a new phone out that enables this feature. Get the facts, right? You look at data and say, ooh, people are using mobile. Why? You can't just design based on the fact that this thing is happening. You need to design based on the behavior of how people are using it. You need to understand the core context. Any questions? So when you do user testing, get people to come and take notes or watch. When you do workshops, get them in the seats or engaged. Show them, go out and do user testing and then show them clips of, hey guys, do you have 5 minutes at lunch? I found this cool stuff. Here's some things that I found and here's some things I want to change. Can we talk about this? It's often hard to do like, let's do a user experience design process. It's sometimes easier to be like, there's this little thing I'm doing. Do you want to come and be a part of it? And oh, this is the next step. Now that we have all your great feedback, do you want to come and make sure that your thoughts are part of the next step and the next step? And that's the same, I think, for a bigger organization as well as a small organization. Get them engaged in the process. Keep inviting them. Give them little bits. You do user testing. Send a daily summary of here are some quotes or here are the big ideas. And stick in I love doing this. Stick in a really bad idea. Like really bad. Be like, we recommend this, and it's a pooper. And they're going to talk to you. Like, there's no way we can do this. Like, how are you? Like, well, this is ridiculous. And then talk about the good ideas. I do that with even when I present usability testing results. I love talking about the stuff that went poorly. It shows validation of the process. It shows that I'm not infallible. It shows that I'm fallible. Which is why it's like we wouldn't do an expert process, but it also gets the client engaged because they want to see who he was wrong and like what is the right stuff and how do we learn more. Yeah, sneak in a little bomb. Just don't tell them I told you that. All right, I know we're running over, so I just have like a couple more slides, and I'm happy to answer more questions once I'm done. You're probably all itching to go. I do want to give a shout out, one to Denver Startup Week. Huge thank you for allowing me to talk to you guys. I'm very excited to talk about this stuff, as you can probably tell. I also want to give a big shout out to General Assembly. I don't know how many of you know them. They're a really great shop that's around the States. I taught with them in Australia. They teach digital things, strategy, UX design, code. They're a really good group. And so I taught with them, and so parts of this presentation are taken from some of those talks. So I want to thank them for those opportunities and for helping get me to where I am today. I also want to do a bit of shameless self-promotion. I'm writing a blog series called What Clients Need to Know, and that was sort of the basis for this discussion. Essentially, it's a list of topics and kind of going into more detail about specific activities around, this is a specific activity around journey maps. I don't talk about how to make a journey map, but I talk about if you're going to engage with a UX agency, this is what you need to know about that process. So you can find those here and then search for What Clients Need to Know. And I also want to say down here, we're hiring. If you have questions, there are other EUI folks around. And again, I'm happy my card is on the banister and I have some up here. And thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Large list of questions. Perfect sort of, here's how to at least ask and at least begin to think about this whole process, and also to decide whether or not to involve other people and how much you can do yourself versus somebody else.
I think it was great. I would give him 9 out of 10, and I'm a harsh judge.
I thought it was great. It was very thorough, and I think it explained a lot about the user experience process. So it was all very interesting. I agreed with everything he said.